Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the workshop on the field of sports data science. I would like to give you the format and then proceed to introduce myself and our four panelists. The format of today will have 3 tiers in which all of the panelists will individually respond to questions associated with their performance as sports data scientists. We will have a roundtable discussion on the importance of diversity in the field of data science, with roundtable discussion amongst the panelists with respect to best practices and strategies to achieve diversity for women and minorities in the field of data science, as well as specifically sports data science. And then we'll go to your audience, you, for a Q&A session. And please, as a reminder, and I'll remind you again to put your questions in the chat box. I am Robert Dean Clayton. I am the CEO and founder of the Sports Analytics Club program, which is the sponsor of this workshop. I am a former associate dean at Tulane Law School. I am your moderator, although my daughter Rachel is in the audience and she said, well, Daddy is not modest, but I am your moderator for today. Our panelists are John Ray. John is with the Boston Red Sox organization, and he is the vice president for data, intelligence, and analytics. Catherine Evans joins us from Monumental Basketball, and she is the vice president for research and information systems. And for those of you all that are not familiar with the organizational structure of Monumental Basketball, it is including the Mystics as well as the Wizards. Our third panelist is Paul Lockett-Koris. Paul is the senior manager for business strategy and analytics for the San Francisco 49ers. And our fourth panelist is Ben Shields. Ben is a co-founder of the Sports Analytics Club program. He is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management, and he is the faculty advisor to the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. Each of the panelists will address the first question, and that is, who is a sports data scientist? And in executing your position, how do you impact superior performance on the field and drive revenue off the field? The second presentation by each of the panelists from their perspective will be looking at what do you consider to be the rapid growth that you've seen in the application of predictive analytics in your respective organizations and generally within the field of sports data scientists. And the third presentation by each of the panelists with regard to their perspective within their organizations will be the use of cutting edge technologies that drive better informed decision-making by each of their organizations, be it in regard to superior performance on the field or driving increased revenue off the field. We will then go to our session, which will be a round table discussion amongst our panelists, the table being set by Ben Shields, on the importance of diversity in the sports data science field and best practices and strategies associated with that achievement. And then we'll go to a Q&A session that will incorporate all of you all who are in the audience, and this is taped, so I'm certain that we'll get additional questions from those that are in person following this presentation. So once again, welcome. I'll start with John. John has an interesting background, and not only was he an economics major at Harvard, which is sort of my thing too, but social relations, not economics. But John made a very dynamic career step. He was head of U.S. inflation trading for Morgan Stanley, and decided to step into the position of a baseball analytics intern for the Boston Red Sox. And that major step raised my intellectual and professional curiosity, in which I'm presenting to John. What attracted you to step from being a head of a department at Morgan Stanley to being an intern, small I, with the Boston Red Sox? And John, if you will present, and each of the panelists will present accordingly, and I will call them in the order of Catherine, Paul, and then to address the same question, but I'll give you all each your personal stepping stone. John.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dean, for the prompt, and certainly thank you to UVA and the whole Data Palooza team. Super fun to be here and fantastic panel. I really enjoyed getting to know these guys as part of our prep. So certainly thank you to everyone for letting us chat today. Dean sort of gave a little bit of the background. My story is I went straight to Wall Street from undergrad. I was 2006, so that was sort of pre-collapse, pre-Dodd-Frank, and so that was sort of a pretty good gettings at the time. Spent 5 years at Morgan Stanley, kind of through the financial crisis, and the story I always tell is, at one point I was sort of looking around on a quiet moment on the desk, and everyone else was looking at stock charts, and I was reading Fangraphs, which is a website for sort of baseball analytics nerds, and sort of realized maybe I should be doing that instead of this. I sort of started thinking about, is there a way that I can I've built this skill set in my time on, at undergrad and also in finance. I can build predictive models. Sort of what I do for a living is I sort of price instruments. Well, that's fundamentally what, baseball analytics is. You're pricing, whether it's a player's performance or a prospect or things like that. So I started really thinking critically about, is there a way that I can sort of make this transition? And I think very early on, it became very apparent that if I was going to do that, it was not really a parallel move, at least at the time. There's maybe a little bit more of it now, and I'm happy to chat about that later. But at the time, it really was, hey, everyone pays their dues. At the Red Sox, almost our entire C-level team, Sam Kennedy, our president, sold hats on then Yawkey Way when he was in high school. Tim Zhu, our CFO, was an unpaid intern. Evan Grossman, our CMO, was an intern. It really is one of those industries that still kind of defines themselves by that. And so, I went back to business school to sort of make this transition to see if I could sort of do that. So I ended up, as Dean mentioned, joining the Red Sox, through some connections. I basically went to a bunch of conferences, went to Sloan multiple times for that conference, was fantastic, and ended up connecting with a guy named Bill James, who some of you may know, sort of the godfather of sabermetrics. He actually coined the term sabermetrics. So I got to know Bill a little bit, and very serendipitous for me as I was graduating U Chicago for my MBA. Bill had been told by John Henry, our principal owner, to hire an intern. He said, "Bill, you're not productive enough. Go hire an intern." And Bill was sort of complaining to a friend of mine that he had to hire someone. He'd never hired someone before. And this guy said, "Well, just hire John Hay. He's a smart kid. He's from Boston. Just meet him." And so I was very lucky that Bill liked me, and I sort of passed his test, and I was able to join the Red Sox. To your point, Dean, as an intern. So I made $8 an hour my first year in 2013. We did win the World Series, so I do have a World Series ring. My tax bill for that year was higher for the ring than it was for the actual work, which I think is a fun fact. But and then 2014, same thing. I was still an intern, and so kind of to vary the lead a little bit here, I sort of sat down with our then president, Larry Lucchino, in 2015 and sort of said, "Hey, look, this is awesome. I love doing this. I'm super passionate about it. I also like health insurance. I also like planning the wedding that I have upcoming with my fiance. How do we feel about a kind of full-time role here?" And so what we carved out as a group was, we really didn't have a business analytics team at all at the time. And so I sort of carved out a role which was sort of taking out a lot more of the business side of the house while still kind of having a dotted line into Bill and sort of trying to straddle that a little bit. And I know, Dean, we chatted a bit about that in our sort of setup. So sort of happy to talk about both those things later. But yeah, that's sort of my, kind of my journey in it. It's been very, very fruitful. I always joke that I still make less money now than I made when I was 22 years old on Wall Street, but I'm 100 times happier. I'm passionate about what I do. And as they say, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life. So hope that kind of gives you a little bit of background on sort of how I got here.
And the points I'd like to make to the audience, particularly those that are thinking about a career as a sports data scientist, is the fact that there was a sacrifice made of income. There was a need for further education, getting a Booth, University of Chicago, MBA. That there was the de-elevation from being a head of a group at Morgan Stanley to being an intern. And then having a perspective of how to add value when there was not a business analytics department. And I hope each of you think about the sacrifice that you're willing to make, both in terms of income and perhaps even location. Think about what you additionally need to do to educate yourself to be a greater added value. Think about the network that you can build by going to the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, because networking is part of the key to understanding the opportunity and what the opportunity demands. Our next panelist is from my hometown, although she wasn't raised in my hometown of Washington, D.C., Catherine Evans. Catherine came from a family of mathematicians. Catherine had the distinction of getting a B in biostatistics from Harvard. Catherine, after getting her PhD in statistics, decided to join the Toronto Raptors. Of all organizations, the Toronto Raptors as the director of strategic research. And it was a pretty dynamic pivot, quite frankly, from a family of mathematicians. It would be great for this audience to know what motivated you to make that stepping stone, PhD in biostatistics, to within 2 years, the director of strategic research, Toronto Raptors.
Sure, absolutely, and thanks for having me, and it's great to be here to talk about this stuff. So I guess maybe I should take a step back from even getting the PhD, which is having a long academic career in statistics. So I did my undergrad in statistics, and then I got a master's in biostatistics, and a lot of that was just sort of really loving statistics and not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life, and just like staying in school for a while and thinking like, oh, this is really interesting, let me get a master's. Oh, this is really interesting, let me get a PhD. As Dean said, my father's a mathematician, my brother's a mathematician. And so there was just always sort of this like, well, you just go into it and it'll be fine and you'll learn stuff. And worst case scenario, if you have trouble with your homework, you can ask your brother for help with it. So I came up with a PhD in biostatistics, and I sort of flirted with the idea of going into sports right out of school, but I'd spent all this time, 7 years in total, if you include my master's, getting an advanced degree. And I thought, well, I should probably do biostatistics for a while at least. And so that's how I ended up in the tech, healthcare industry at Verily, which is the life sciences arm of Google. And I did really enjoy that. But I'd always been doing sports on the side. So even when I was in high school and I was taking, AP statistics, anytime there was go find a sports data set and do an analysis on it, or go find a data set externally and do analysis on it, it was basically always sports data. I think one time it was Hollywood movie data, because I also really like the entertainment industry. And so I was just constantly doing, little side projects. I was, my freshman year at Harvard was when the Red Sox won the World Series for the first time. And so I've seen a lot of Red Sox victories. As a longtime Red Sox fan, I was like, wait a minute, we're supposed to lose. This is very confusing. And I remember thinking like, oh, there was this whole thing of like, oh, do they actually have a home field advantage? And I really distinctly remember pulling a bunch of that data in my first ever statistics class in college and trying to examine, do the Red Sox have a home field advantage? And it sort of grew from there. When I was in grad school, I would go to academic statistics conferences, so the joint statistical meetings, and things like that. And there would often be sports sessions. So you go to this huge statistics conference and there's like 3 sports sessions. And I always seemed to find myself at those sessions. I didn't think it was a career path that I could go down, but I met a lot of people as a result of that. And so the networking was sort of through the academic side of things. And it was just meeting other people who were getting their PhDs or who were professors, and learning about the interesting methodologies that were being applied in the sports space. I also, I was at school in Boston, so it was very easy to attend the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. I'm not sure that was as formative as going to JSM and just, connecting with people through the academic side of things, but it certainly did help. And again, I was very lucky that I didn't have to worry about flights or hotels or anything like that. I just had to get to the conference and pay for a student ticket. But nonetheless, being able to talk to people and go to panels and things like that was useful. So I come out with my PhD and I go into biostatistics, sort of as a career path. And I found that really interesting, and that was great. I didn't dislike it, but the sort of lure of sports was always there. And I was doing all these side projects. Like basically all of my free time was being spent working on sports analytics projects. And so when the time came that I decided I just didn't, I didn't want to work in my current job anymore for a variety of reasons, mostly actually sort of family related. I wanted to move back to California. And then a friend of mine said, "Oh, you're thinking about switching jobs. Oh, does this mean you're going into sports finally?" And I went, "Oh, I should go into sports finally. Like, I should see if that would work." And serendipitously, it did. And the Raptors happened to be hiring, and a couple of other teams as well. And I was able to have some options. And so, sort of the transition from being in this academic family and this academic career to sports doesn't feel like a big jump to me, because it was always there. I was always working on sports analytics. I mean, like, truly, I remember learning about like the binomial distribution with respect to free throw shooting when I was 14. So it has always been there. And it didn't feel like a dynamic choice that I was making. It felt like a natural progression.
I will say this, you will hear reference to the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference as a keystone event for both young folks and those that are maturing and those that are experienced. And I also had a reflection point on that, which I will address with Ben Shields in terms of how I ended up establishing our sports analytics program. And it also involved my meeting with Ben Shields in the spring of 2017. Paul has had a very circuitous routing from my perspective, from going from Palo Alto to ending up being an associate in M&A for what's now called PCAP, small WC. PricewaterhouseCoopers for us old hats in the big 8 accounting firms, to joining Rice University in Houston, Texas, a long way from Palo Alto, quite frankly, but also focusing not on M&A, but on business analytics for the Rice University athletics program. And so I felt that whole transition from Stanford Palo Alto to PwC in M&A as a senior level advisor to Rice University, to me was a pretty dynamic step to become part of the field of data scientists in the sports industry. And Paul, give a reflective point in terms of what I consider your stepping stones, so this audience understands how you ended up being where you are today.
Yeah, certainly. And thanks for having me. I echo a lot of what John and Catherine already said about, like, this was just where the passion truly was. The skills were transferable, but it's just a subject and an application of those skills and that knowledge that was more enjoyable for me personally. So, studied economics in college, did a couple of internships on Wall Street, and just came to, analyzing numbers and finances just came naturally to me, and it was something I enjoyed doing. But like the others have said, since I was a kid, since I was 10 years old, I was running analyses on baseball statistics just for fun, because that was a cool way for me to look at numbers, something I enjoyed doing. So, after my finance background in school, eventually wound up in management consulting, where I spent 4 years analyzing companies' financial performance, operational performance. How can we make these companies operate more efficiently? If a company or a financial player makes an acquisition of a new company, like, how do they integrate that into their existing company? And so we're the same type of Excel modeling, looking at the detailed income statements and financials of how to improve a company's performance. But that was for pharmaceutical companies and automotive companies and telecom companies, and something that I didn't really have any sort of honest interest in or passion for. And I had always known since I was a kid that I wanted to be in the sports industry. And so after this time in consulting, I just started looking around at jobs at the NBA or with different teams, different leagues. And I had always sort of wanted to go into professional sports, but I came across an opportunity at Rice University where they had hired a new athletic director there who was building out a team of business strategy, business intelligence, marketing, just a lot of things that they hadn't put attention into before. They had never done outbound ticket sales before 2012, which is, picking up the phone and reaching out proactively to try and sell tickets. It was always just like, if someone comes into the office, we'll sell them tickets, but they didn't do proactive outreach. So there was a whole new mindset in this department of we have this history of 50 or 60 years of never having really been that successful on the field in their athletic programs. And as a consequence of that, never really being successful from a business standpoint, because in college sports, on-field success and revenue go hand in hand, and they both feed off of each other. In order to be successful on the field, you have to have a strong financial position. But in order to have a strong financial position, you need to have success on the field. So it's kind of, can't have one without the other.
Right.
And so after they hired this new athletic director, they tried to get on that cycle of make money, win games, make money. And so from that respect, it was very similar to the work I had done in consulting, where you look at a business that's in trouble and struggling financially, and what can we do to try and improve things there? Took that same approach to now a college athletics department. And instead of the beneficiaries being, executives at some Fortune 500 company or shareholders or something like that, the beneficiaries were like the student athletes playing at Rice University, these kids who are on scholarship. And what can we do to drive more revenue to the department so that they have a better opportunity to succeed in the classroom, on the court, on the field. And so all of this was, using the same sorts of skills, both from like a quantitative analytical perspective, but also just sort of just structuring a problem. When you have information and you need to make a complicated decision, how do you think about the information that you have, and how do you lay out a process to try and improve upon that? So those are things that I did at Rice to try and grow ticket sales there, grow sales of licensed merchandise. And then after about 4 years there at Rice, where I had built up, took the experience from consulting and finance, and now had some experience in sports, was able to get a position with the San Francisco 49ers in the NFL, doing similar type of work with our business strategy department. And, a lot of my colleagues there are former consultants, former finance, private equity, and we all do the same sort of work there of taking a analytical, business-minded approach to improving the performance of a sports organization.
As you listen to the three presenters, Paul, John, and Catherine, you hear some very significant touch points. This is about business. This is about intelligence. And this is about the use of predictive data to make better informed decisions, whether it's how you get a superior on the field performance or how you get a superior drive revenue off the field, so to speak. Key to that understanding of the sports data science field is to understand sports is the industry, but as an industry, it's driven by the same dynamicism of private equity. It's driven by the same dynamicism of a defense contractor. And so that's a very important factoring that I've come to appreciate. And that is, look at what we do from a business intelligence perspective, a business strategy perspective, and a predictive data analytics perspective, knowing that the sports industry may be your passion, but the fundamental skill sets associated with data science are true to every major industry in this country. Ben Shields is very familiar with me and I with him, as I sat in his office in the spring of 2017, wondering, how did I get here? I was in a house at Harvard, 5 blocks away on Memorial Drive, swearing I would never go to the MIT campus, and I certainly would not sit in the midst of an MIT professor. I'm a social relations major. But I had a person who was a mentee, who was a mid-major basketball coach, who wanted to figure out, how do I improve the trajectory of my career? Because at this point, I don't see where that is at 38 years old, and I can no longer be someone identified with young recruits at the age of 18. And Ed Tapscott, who is a good friend of mine, many of you all know him from the sports industry. He's been a long-term NBA executive, said, Dwayne, you need to register for the Sports Analytics Conference at Sloan, and you need to take a 101 statistics course at George Mason University. which he did not do. But I fully expected him to join with me in Ben Shield's office, which he did not do, but there I was. And I learned a lot about the sports analytics business. And Ben Shields was very patient with me. And we, as a result of that, founded with Ed Tapscott, the Sports Analytics Club program. I remember pulling basketball on paper off his shelf and saying, "What is basketball on paper?" And he said that application of analytics to the performance on the court of the sport of basketball. Ben, welcome. You're a longtime friend and colleague in this mission. And I sit here as a result of that conversation with you, quite frankly, in 2017, and welcome to 2021. We've come a long way, and I appreciate your patience with me and the confidence that you've had in building the program with me for younger people to be part of this scene in the next 5 to 10 years. Ben Shields.
Robert, thanks so much for having me. And I do want to extend my gratitude to you for your leadership and vision throughout these last few years with the Sports Analytics Club program. It's great to be here with the other panelists as well. And my story has a similar foundation in my passion at a very early age for the intersection of sports, data, and technology. I was a fantasy sports nerd. I was the kid in the 80s and the 90s that would be crunching the numbers by looking at the box score in the newspaper and using my calculator to tally up the scores for the fantasy leagues that I played with in my family and my friends. So I came from that childhood. I then went on to pursue my studies at Northwestern University and ended up going on to get a PhD there in a program called Media Technology and Society. And this was around 2004, 2005, when scholars and businesses alike were starting to try to get their arms around what are the implications of the internet. And I said, okay, I can study the implications of the internet on business and society, and I can do it through sports. So I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation on fantasy sports, which again, at the time was just starting to digitalize as a result of the internet, and now is, of course, a cornerstone of the sports industry. I did get my PhD in 2008, and I was at the age of 26, which was on the younger side, and I knew that I would eventually go back to teach, but thankfully got a great opportunity to go to work at ESPN. And I started there in 2008. Where one of the strategic questions was, how do we adapt to the social media technologies that are now available? And that started as a bit of a half-time, part-time job, and then quickly evolved into my full-time focus at ESPN. And again, what was so exciting to me about the social media space was now, from a content standpoint, we had so much more data on a real-time basis coming into us that could help us answer some questions about what content fans want. And that to me was very exciting to kind of get my hands on this data. And we built a very data-driven team in terms of how we made decisions on content and programming various different platforms. I then started working with my co-authors on our second book, The Sports Strategist, around 2012, 2013. And it became clear that what was happening on the field with data, what was happening in the business side of sports with data, what was happening in media that I was working in directly with data was going to only continue to grow in importance. And I had a great opportunity as a result of some of my work to make the transition back to academia at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where I've created a course on social media and I've taught that for the last 8 years. And also for the last couple of years, co-created a course on sports strategy and analytics. That's a bit about my journey. I think overall, what I would say to anyone that is considering a role in this field, it is so much about your passion and love of sports. And it's also about the unique skills and experiences that you can bring to the sports industry. I have interviewed a lot of students or prospective employees in the past about, hey, why do you want to get into sports? It's, well, I love sports, I love data, and I love social media in my case. Well, a lot of people love all those things. And I think there's a really exciting opportunity for you as a prospective employee of the sports industry to maybe show your skills somehow, to do a project, to go beyond the resume and create something that you can share that demonstrates your skills and passion and knowledge about the space. And I know we'll continue to talk a little bit more about that, but that's something that has worked for me, and I think it can work for others as well.
You know, we have a structure to this program, but I do want to have a touch point here. We certainly appreciate that individuals such as ourselves and younger folks grow up in a culture where sports is a very predominant factoring in what we read, what we share by way of experience to a ball game, be it our own ball game or a child's ball game or an adult's ball game in the professional leagues or even at the collegiate level as well. And the question becomes, can you take your passion and find an opportunity in the sports industry, and what would be that niche? I come to the same orientation. I came out of law school in 76, and I love sports and I love sports unions, and I ultimately taught in this area at Tulane. I ultimately was counsel to the Basketball Players Association and the Football Players Association as a lead chief negotiator for collective bargaining agreements in both of those situations. And so I share with this group of panelists the interests in sport, finding the passion to that interest, and then finding the niche. In my case, it was a niche as a trade union negotiator representing the Basketball Players Association and NFL Players Association early on in my career in the 1980s. The pivot here is, of course, what is the future? Not what is the currency of the use of predictive analytics, but what is the future? Because the vast majority of you all in the audience are looking, if this is an interest of mine, what's the future that these panelists see in using predictive analytics and to see where the growth is in your capacity to improve performance on the field and within the revenue drivers of the organizations as they define themselves, and also new revenue drivers for their particular organization. So I'll start with John. John, you can be the patriarch of our group, although I think I am the patriarch of all of you all. But you have now been able to go from an intern to actually looking through across all departments and the application of predictive analytics. And so what do you see as the growth in what you're doing in your capacity as a vice president with the Red Sox, who's now over those departments and the use of predictive analytics as you see a growth to that application to each of your departments, both on and off the field?
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably answer this in two ways. One is to tap into something Paul referenced, which you mentioned that Rice didn't have an outbound sort of sales team. Neither did the Red Sox one, actually. That's not college specific. Some of that was certainly based on the fact that we had a long sell streak at the time, but it also I think reflects the fact that Moneyball came over 20 years ago. And I think in a lot of respects, certainly in baseball, but I think really in a lot of major sports, the sort of the process of bringing predictive analytics to the on-field component, it's not played out. There's a lot to still do, but it's not, it's not under the covers anymore, right? Every single club is doing it. And so I think what you've really seen is that transition start to happen on the sort of off-field side. So, part of that I think is sports are a copycat industry for sure. So when, teams see other clubs doing things, they want to do it as well. But also I think it reflects, a lot of, money coming into the sport. So our ownership group, for example, are primarily people who made their money in hedge funds, right? They're quantitative people who can afford to buy sports teams because they recognize inefficiencies in a market. So they want to run their teams the same way. And so people like, with my background, Paul's background, et cetera, we didn't get hired on the business side, 5-10 years ago in sports. And so I think that's really permeated all the way down. I think, our sales team used to be, Sam Kennedy, our president, he was a sales guy. His joke is open up the phone book, pick a name out, and I'll sell some tickets, right? Well, you can certainly do that, but hopefully we can use, upstream data, predictive data analytics to tell you whom to call, right? And when to call them and sort of what the message is. And so I think, when I started sort of on the business side about 6 years ago now, I wouldn't say there was sort of a reticence, but it was brand new. Our sales, operations, marketing teams, we just didn't have a data-driven sort of approach to that. And that's really turned on its head now to the point where I think virtually every sort of major club, every major sport, certainly in America, now has, people with, finance, consulting, et cetera, sort of backgrounds kind of coming and bringing those sort of strategies, into the business. And for us, I mean, ticket pricing is a great example. We in 2013 did neither variable nor dynamic ticket pricing at Fenway, meaning we didn't charge different prices for games and we didn't change prices over time. The airline industry has been doing this for 60 years and we weren't doing it at Fenway Park. We now do full park dynamic, every single seat has its own price at different times. But that was a pretty big shift for us in kind of 6 years. So I think some of that is just as this stuff's become more mainstream, even people that don't have a data background are sort of like, it's everywhere in their lives. They're being hit with it. They sort of understand it a bit more, even if they don't kind of practice it. So I think that has been a really big shift that we've seen. When we were starting off, we were really kind of pushing ourselves to people. We're saying, hey, let us help you do your jobs more effectively, more efficiently, et cetera. Now it's really pull. We got people coming to us saying, hey, I hear you guys are the smart ones, help us kind of thing, which is a great spot to be. So that's sort of one thing. The other thing I'll just add real quick is I think what we've seen a lot, my role has really been on the analytics side for a long time, really about how do I take data, build predictive models, build a story out of the output, and drive decision making. In the last kind of 2 or 3 years, much more of my sort of purview has become around sort of the actual data side, right? Data warehousing on premises versus, in the cloud. ETL, transformation processes. How do you pull data from 30 disparate sources, bring it into your data warehouse, cleanse it, dedupe it, sort of put it in one place? Sometimes that's a lot of the battle. It's great that you can build a predictive model, but, in school, that model is given to you in a problem set. In the real world, data is really, really messy. And so there's been a lot more focus on bring in data engineers and folks that can really sort of, work with the structure of data to sort of get to the point where you can actually throw it into R or use Python or sort of tools like that. So that's been something I really had to drink from the fire hose. So that's not my background, but I've certainly learned a lot in the last couple of years. And I do see a real continued growth there because on the baseball side for us, for example, we have so much of this high definition video now, right? Between TrackMan and Penetrax and some of these things, even just our data storage needs have gone up on a logarithmic scale in the last 5 years. So, we've become a big data company without realizing it. We sort of woke up one day and said, I guess we're a big data company because we have a lot of data. And so I think really that focus on where does your data live? How do you access it? How do you cleanse it? How do you structure it? Has really become, I think, a huge aspect of what we do.
One, I think, critical aspect of what John just said was the need to understand the fundamental skill sets associated with becoming a data scientist. And we will talk about that in our session dealing with the importance of diversity in the field of data science and specifically sports data science, and how we can encourage younger people to learn the fundamental skill set of perhaps by culture, perhaps by personal interest in sport, and then apply that skill set across a wide range of industries. And if it happens to land in the sports industry space, then you end up being on a Datapalooza panel 5 years from now. If not, you will be working for a Leidos, which is one of our major sponsors for our program, or a Bechtel, or even a Deloitte, but not in the sports practice space, for a PwC. And that's what is very much critical to what we do here on this panel, is say sports can be a magnet, but can also magnify opportunities in other industries. If you get attracted by sport, learn the fundamental skill set associated with being a data scientist, and then apply it to the industry which either recruits you, or for which you have a passion to be recruited, or to then end up, as these individuals have, to another industry, private equity being one, but ultimately landing where you wish to be in sport. I'll turn to Catherine. I know that you are an academic by background and family, and you also have had the opportunity to see where the rapid growth can be. And if you could touch upon that, that would be great.
I mean, I think John touched on something at the end there of just like the volume of data coming in has really increased a lot, which is if you think about like a very specific example in basketball is that if you go back and you think about historic games, the data that we have on those historic games is a box score, right? There is one box score per game. And you can look at it and you can say, hey, this guy scored this many points and had this many assists, and that's great. Eventually we saw the field move into having play-by-play. So for each play and each outcome, you know who was on the floor and what happened. And there's some level of granularity there, depending on how good the play-by-play is. Like you might say, Bradley Beal hit a three-pointer from the right wing, and it was an assist from Kyle Kuzma or something like that. And okay, great. That's some interesting stuff. And we know everybody was on the floor, and you might even know who was contesting that shot. But several years ago, we started getting tracking data, and that is for 50 times per second, 20 times per second. We have where every player is on the court and the ball. And now you have 1 million rows per game. And so that is crazy exponential growth in terms of how much data we need to ingest per game. And then if you think about that's just, sort of like how do we keep track of what's happening on the court? There's also all kinds of other interesting data that we're starting to get in looking at scouting. Again, there, it used to be like, hey, you got a box score from some college game. And now we can get play-by-play from college games. And now, we have all these like scouting reports that are coming in, and how do you capture that in a structured way so you can analyze your information on young players in a more structured way, in a more quantitative way. There's also, all kinds of like medical data and player performance data. I think it's pretty well known that there's like force plates that you can have players, doing, exercises on and all kinds of stuff like that. And so there's all of this data that's available. How do you ingest it? How do you clean it? How do you get it to a point where it's in a nice, like CSV that I can put into R, I can put into Python, and actually get some results from. So I would say there's a huge amount of just sort of like software engineering and development that is necessary now, far more than there ever was in terms of building out internal systems. But on top of that, one of the skill sets is sort of the like, okay, you have all of this data. What do you do with it? How do you find signal from noise? How do you understand, well, this data was captured in a certain way, but maybe it's fundamentally missing something, which is like, I'm trying to think of the exact specific example, but I know like in baseball, there was something where it was like in the like TrackMan data, there was some that was missing. And you might think, well, is it missing at random? Is it missing completely at random? Is it missing not at random? And it's like, well, when the ball happens to be hit at this particular angle or at this particular speed, it just doesn't pick up on it. And so there's a missing not at random component there. And if you don't understand what that means, you don't understand how to handle that type of data, the analyses that you would do on a complete data set is going to be wrong. So it's not just how do you get that data in, it's do you understand how it was collected and do you understand the consequences therein. And so I think that those are, when I think about what does it take to be a good data scientist, it's sort of like understanding data collection, but then what is the data you're collecting and how do you analyze it in a way that's actually correct? It can be very easy to just say, oh, we have all this data, let's find some insights. But like, okay, what does that mean? And obviously I come from a statistics background. And so I'm like, well, that you learn statistics. And then once you learn statistics, you'll know how to actually get insights. But, all of these parts are really important.
It's very, can be very complex as you, the audience, listen at certain terminology that our panelists speak like the back of their hand. Cleansed data, structured data, identify algorithms and reach conclusions, and data visualizations. All of these concepts are ones which are routinely spoken about and understood by all of our panelists. And I say that to the audience. Python and R programming training, you can access that training as younger people, as adults that want to be more attractive to the niche of the sports industry and to the data science in more broad terms. You can learn how to do Python programming, R programming. You can learn how to build data visualizations. These are within the capacity of your learning without necessarily having an opportunity to apply it for pay, but certainly can learn the skill sets to make yourself more marketable as you network and show the value of what you've learned that can be of immediate value to the opportunity that you're looking to seize. Paul had a very interesting route to what this part of the program was to be about, cutting edge. And that is, I looked at his background as a senior level associate in M&A at PwC and said, he's now talking about mergers and acquisitions within this space of companies that can augment what they're doing. And Paul, if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Sorry, I didn't fully get the question there. What was the question about M&A?
No, so and listening to your prep for this, you mentioned that there were companies that you all at with the 49ers have acquired and seen augment what you're doing principally, but also reaching out to consultants and consulting companies that can actually add to the value of what you do, particularly on the back office side of driving revenue.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. So, within the 49ers, one of our big pillars in our business strategy group is to grow the brand. We can have 70,000 fans in the building on a game day, but we want the 49ers brand to reach a lot more people than just that 70,000. We want it to be millions of people or hundreds of millions of people around the world. And so we have a strategic approach to doing that. And one of the ways here locally that we do it in the Bay Area is we acquired a TV show called Cal High Sports that is a high school sports highlight show. They'll show highlights from all different boys and girls sports, not just boys football and basketball. And they also will show inspirational stories, a kid who overcame some adversity in his or her life and is now succeeding for a local Bay Area high school. So that was a mom and pop show that had been on the air for 20 years or so, and we acquired it. So it now has a 49ers branding on it. We are able to, tap our corporate sponsors from a 49ers, overall 49ers position. So US Bank is a major 49ers sponsor, and Safeway, the grocery store, and United Airlines, and these huge partners that have 6- and 7-figure deals with the 49ers. We're now able to plug them in with the show where they'd previously been doing 4- and 5-figure deals on the show to get advertisers and sponsors. And now they're able to talk to, the head of marketing at United Airlines. So we're able to sort of turbocharge the power of the show to attract new sponsors. And then this was timed partially around the Oakland Raiders leaving and going to Las Vegas. So within the NFL, there's something called a home marketing area, which is you're only legally allowed to market your team within a certain radius around your stadium. And if it overlaps, if it overlaps with the territory of another team, you're not we couldn't legally put a billboard in Oakland because that was the Raiders' territory. With them leaving to Las Vegas, that opens all of Northern California to us as our legal area. And so that show airs in the East Bay in the Oakland area. And it's a part of our overall strategy to reach youth and sort of the next generation, because we're not going to take a grown 35, 45-year-old person who's been a Raiders fan their whole life and make them suddenly a 49ers fan. But if there's a kid playing in high school and that person's little brother sees them on TV with a 49ers logo on it, and we have all this branding around the show from the 49ers, maybe that gets me more interested in the 49ers where I wouldn't have been otherwise. And even if I'm not a football fan, if I saw my big sister playing volleyball on the 49ers show, maybe I go buy a 49ers t-shirt now. So that's one way which we've been expanding. And then also Elevate Sports Ventures is a consulting company that we founded. So very applicable to work I was doing in consulting to what I'm doing now. And so we take the data analysis work and data strategy and business intelligence, all the sort of things that we do for the 49ers, and we consult out to outside organizations who have those same problems. I think John mentioned, not a lot of people were looking at this stuff 10, 20 years ago, but now it's kind of just table stakes. You have to have a solid team in place and a solid data infrastructure and a business strategy and all these things. And so, we started this from nothing. We're talking about explosive growth. There was nothing in this company 3 years ago, and now we have 30 or 40 clients all around the world. So not just within sports. We launched the New York Islanders have a new arena in Long Island, UBS Arena. So we helped get that up and running, create the building basically, and sell all the premium hospitality and ticket sales there, sponsorships. We have partnerships with a lot of MLS clubs. So St. Louis City SC, which is near and dear to my heart because I'm from St. Louis. It's a new MLS team that will start play in 2023, and we're basically helping to create that franchise. We consulted on Co-op Live, which is a new live music arena in Manchester, England. So no sports connection there at all. It's just they're doing concerts in England, but the same sort of strategic approach to building the premium areas. What do the suites and the clubs in this place look like? What are the amenities that we offer? What is the pricing? How do we go to market with this? How do we sell it to business customers, to individuals? And so if all those things are applicable for the 49ers at a football game, they can also be applicable to an arena operator in England. So those are some ways in which we kind of want to have our hands on anybody in the sports and entertainment industry who wants to think about a business problem.
So what's critical to what Paul has expressed is the fact that data drives the opportunity to expand the business, to touch other businesses, both within sport globally and not necessarily in the sports industry. I've become very fascinated, quite frankly, in fan moments, and the fact that as a fan, you are creating data regarding what you prefer, particularly in a in-stadium experience, and how can I further appeal to what you are appealed to by the data, whether it's the concession purchasing, whether it's the bandwidth in your area of the stadium, to create a better experience for you, and to then create a better opportunity to produce revenue. Then in terms of teaching in the classroom, as you look at when you started teaching and the parameters of what you were trying to have those young people learn about the application of data analytics to the sports industry, what have you seen in terms of what you're teaching now that has shown the growth of data analysis and predictive valuing and data visualization that students now need to learn about, because that is going to be how they are seeing their future application of what they've learned in your class?
Sure, absolutely. And I think we heard from the three other panelists about some of these skills as well, and I'll just sort of synthesize what we try to teach in our course. I firmly believe that there are three key skill sets for data scientists. First and foremost, having the technical skills to do rigorous analysis. That is, number one, a non-negotiable, right? And that's got to be the focus. In addition, what I try to teach, particularly our MBA students, is how to align their technical work with the needs of the business, or in this case, the needs of the sports organization, so that they are asking and then answering through data and analytics questions that will drive value to the organization. So you got to have excellent technical skills and also the strategic skills to connect the technical work to the business. The third skill that I really focus on a lot with our management students is what I would call a more managerial skill, the ability to integrate or apply insights from the analysis to the decision-making process. And that we could call even last mile step can be a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. I often think of data science as its own language. There is a different language. And if you're trying to, as a data scientist, communicate your insights to the coaching staff on the player side, to players on the player side, or on the business side, maybe the sales staff, there's going to be varying levels of understanding of analytics, and also this very real thing called human emotion, where, hey, I've actually been pretty successful doing things the way that I've been doing them. And that analytics thing, that's not for me, right? So what I really try to work on with my students is developing the communication strategy skills so that they can take whatever insight they have and translate it to various audiences to achieve a certain outcome, right? And again, the way that you might communicate to one audience is going to be very different. And so for me, I try to take a holistic view, probably not so dissimilar to the School of Data Science at UVA either, that you got to have the strong technical skill set. You also, as you emerge as a data scientist, the more you can understand the business and connect your technical work to the needs of the business from a strategy standpoint, that helps. And then crucially, the more you're able to help the organization apply and integrate your insights into the actual decision-making process, in part enabled through what I would call translation or interpretation skills, the better and more marketable you're going to be as a data scientist. And that's part of what we focus on in my teaching.
In this session, our third session for you individually, I'm going to call this rapid fire so that we can give ample opportunity for Q&A. And so on the rapid fire session, this is what I'd like for each of you, John, Catherine, and Paul. Name one cutting edge technology or method that you see on the horizon. Catherine has also reminded me it cannot be proprietary. So for those of you all that are concerned about IP, we're going to do rapid one cutting edge technology or methodology that you see currently on the horizon that will make a difference in how you understand the data you're looking at, how you analyze it, how you identify algorithms associated with it, and have a data visualization that's driven by this cutting edge technology that is in the future, but not having been used to produce the data that you're presently using for your predictive valuing. So John, I'll start with you. It's rapid. Tell me one cutting edge technology that you see currently or coming up that will make a difference in terms of what data you can collect and how you can synthesize it to produce a visualization to drive decision making.
Sure. Brevity is not my strong suit, but I will do my best. Probably the biggest one for us on the business side is really kind of IoT, sort of Internet of Things. We've started doing some pilot work around basically creating unique codes for cell phones when they enter the ballpark, and then sort of being able to track those, not at a person level necessarily, right? Because it's anonymized relative to the human being, but to be able to track that sort of cell phone as it goes around Fenway Park. And it's actually really cool. You meant data visualization, and Catherine alluded to this, when she talked about what do you do with this giant data set. You can kind of build these really cool, folks remember the sort of Family Circus comics where you can get this dotted line all over the park. You can sort of watch these people come into the park and sort of see how they engage over the course of 3.5 hours. And historically for us, Fenway was a bit of a black box. We sort of knew what people did up until the point where they came in, but we weren't doing a lot of, digital, purchase of concessions. We didn't have a lot of touch points in the park. And so now for us, things like ingress, egress, things like waiting in lines for concessions, there's a lot of stuff that we can do by really kind of tracking this data sort of in the park. And I think our goal really is if you can get to the point where you're interacting with those customers in the park based on where they are, right? So someone comes in, who they are because you're connecting their phone with their account through their scan time. And you're saying, hey, I know your kid's favorite player is Xander Bogaerts. As they walk by the team store, they're getting a notification that says, hey, 20% off a Xander Bogaerts jersey. You got to be careful not to be too big brothery, but I think there's opportunities for us to really engage a lot more with our fans at the park. And I think people expect that because, at home, you got the two screen experience, right? So how do we sort of take that second screen back while they're there in person? So that's rapid for me.
Catherine, now that you have synthesized what is proprietary and not, what would you see in your position now that would be a cutting edge technology or method that would produce data that can drive decision making, whether on the court superior performance or off the court merchandise revenue that wasn't available, let's say, within the last year, but you see coming to your opportunity to learn more about the data that's there. Data's always been there, but be able to attract the data, cleanse the data, structure it, and produce a better driven decision.
Yeah, the big one is going to be video. So taking broadcast video and translating that into basically the tracking data that we get from the high-speed cameras. So we get tracking data on NBA games because we have 10 high-speed cameras in every arena. But you don't get that for college games, you don't get that for high school. And so being able to just take broadcast and translate, where the guys are running on the court and say, okay, that was at this point and that was at this point, will be one of the next big things. And it's already being developed and it's getting better and better every year. So that's like pretty clearly, an upcoming technology.
And Paul, I will turn to you. I know you're on the business side. What on the business side are you seeing in terms of what I call cutting edge technologies and methods of analyzing data that can be either utilized now or you see being utilized in the future to drive better decision making through big data analysis on the business side?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to talk about and promote our member inclusive menu, which is a new initiative we've put in place this year. So looking for a way to better satisfy our season ticket members and provide the value behind a season ticket. We moved to a program this year where all of our season ticket members in the building get their concessions included for free with the price of their ticket. So any non-alcoholic beverage, and then the standard food items, hot dogs, nachos, French fries, soft drinks, all those things are included with the price of their ticket. So we put that in place this year. There's been an absolutely enormous effort from my team to make the technology work. So we have our 49ers app, which is powered by a company called VenueNext, that is actually, a 49ers company. And so making sure that our fans, they scan a QR code on the kiosk at the concession stand from their phone that's connected to their ticketing account that recognizes them as a season ticket member and provides the food for free. So it just prints out a ticket for the cashiers or the people working behind the counter to fulfill the order without any payment. And so there's a huge technology piece to make that work. And then the operations of actually implementing it. So from training the cashiers and the stand managers to educating the fans, we had to have all sorts of publications and communication to our members of how this works and alerting them to the fact that the program exists, because we are 3, 4, 5 home games into the season. Some of them show up and still don't realize that they have this benefit. So there's technology, there's communication, there's logistics and operations implementation. And we believe that this is going to be a trend in the industry. The Falcons introduced what they called street level pricing a few years ago, where their concessions were affordable in the building instead of paying $9 for a hot dog. And we've taken it a step further, having it free included with the price of a season ticket. And we believe that more teams, I think somebody mentioned earlier, sports is a copycat industry. We think this is going to catch on. We think it's going to be something a lot of teams do in the future. And as I mentioned, Elevate earlier, we're happy to consult this new program to other teams who are interested. So if anybody here works for the Boston Red Sox or the Washington Wizards and you're interested in adding an all-inclusive member benefit to your season ticket program, we can help you with that. And then I'll just real quickly touch on a couple other points. When you talk about growth in the industry, legalized sports betting is going to be absolutely huge in the years ahead. 2018, the Supreme Court overturned a decision that basically was only legal in Nevada. So states can determine if they want to allow sports betting now, and that's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue annually that have always been underground and illegal and are now coming to light and will be regulated and legitimized. So that's going to be a huge one to watch. And then also NFTs. I will admit here, I'm way out of my depth. I don't really understand or know what an NFT is at all, but I know the 49ers are looking at it, the NFL is looking at it. I think the NBA has been a leader in that space. But when you talk about cryptocurrency and NFTs and the sort of the new way that digital trends are going, that's going to be huge in sports, even if I personally don't understand it at all.
This is what I'd like to do, because I know that we have a premium on time and would like to at least have the opportunity for the audience to Q&A us. I hope they've covered a lot of the questions that they had as they came to this workshop through your presentations. As I came to Ben Shield's office, and remains true today, the significant lack of young women, Latinos, and African American in the field of data science, not just sports, but in virtually every industry. Today, 3% of the data scientists are African American by way of position across industries. 7% are Latinx, and 15% are women. And we have a client for our program, Leidos, that in any given Friday will post 100 plus data scientist positions for just that hiring period. We look at the 106 data scientists on the performance side for the 30 NBA teams, and we can identify 2 African Americans, Shane Battier and Christian Wright. With the Milwaukee Bucks, we can identify perhaps 6 women. Catherine, you've added to that equation. Ben and I have spoken about the need for diversity, but I think it's more critical to understanding the importance of diversity to drive better performance of data scientists. And Ben, I'd like you to sort of set that table in terms of why diversity is important from the business perspective, not just from the social justice or economic parity perspectives that we look at these decision makings with regard to diversity, but just straight out the importance of having diverse cultural experiences and lifestyles, as well as across racial and gender lines, to being a better data science field.
Sure. A couple quick things for me, Robert. Number one, just to underscore the point about demand for data science talent. We are in a marketplace where there is a shortage. I can't tell you anecdotally how many companies and executives that I talk to and say, we need more data scientists. So number one, there is a significant demand for people with that type of skill set. To the point about diversity, look, in general, most of the research suggests that when you have people with diverse points of view and diverse backgrounds on a team, that tends to lead to more creativity and better results. And even, and especially with data science work, there are still human decisions made on what method are we going to choose here, or how are we going to interpret those results. And so having people with different diverse backgrounds as part of a data science team informing decisions on analytical choices, I think will only set up a team to have even more success and better outcomes. So it's not just about a shortage of talent, which is real. It's also about developing a team with a chance to deliver better results by having more diversity within that group.
I had a very dynamic presentation by Catherine about when you're in a position to understand the importance of diversity in the business of what we do, whether it's sports or financial services or defense, and how do you expand so that as you look at capacity need and you see 3% of a 12% population African-American being in this field, you see 7% of a 45% population capacity if you're Latinx, and probably more dramatically is more dramatic the fact that only 15% of our field as data scientists are women, yet we're looking at a 55% population density. Catherine, I would love for you to speak to your practice and your understanding the importance of it, to particularly introduce a wider range of folks looking at what the skill set is necessary or the experience, and then allowing that to be a guide point to expand the opportunity.
Yeah, so this is a big topic, and I've thought about this a lot, and I've been asked about it a lot. And I think there's a number of things, and one thing I want to hit on is sort of that, like, when you're in a high level position and you have the power to make decisions and you have the power to do things, I think it's good to be really conscious of this and to be active always trying to do more. So I think I sort of want to address 2 things. So one is sort of hiring, but the first one is sort of exposure and opportunity. So I think we all talked about, or not all of us, there was a lot of conversation about going to the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference and going to conferences and meeting with people. And that can be a real burden for people who are interested in getting involved in this field. Not just along, underrepresented lines, but for anybody who wants to, which is the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference is really expensive, and it's even more expensive if you don't live within driving distance. And so there's sort of a question of like, well, how do you make opportunities like that available to more people? How do you have conferences in cities that have more diversity in them and thus have there be more opportunities? And so on the one hand, from a sort of student perspective, from those who are interested, it's don't just think that you only have to go to these big, expensive, splashy conferences. There are a lot of smaller ones that are more local and that are a lot cheaper. And that even if they have prices attached to them, if you ask, they'll probably let you come for free. Especially ones attached to universities. There's a number and that are free or very, very low cost, and many of which are also shown online. They're streamed. And so there is a chance to watch and see presentations. It sort of cuts down on the networking opportunities if you can't be there in person. And that's just an unfortunate truth of human interaction, which is that we do better when we can actually see people and talk to them and sit down and have lunch and bump into somebody in the hallway. But I think, if you're organizing something, if you're organizing an opportunity to just understand the types of people that might be shut out, that you don't recognize because you've never been shut out of those types of opportunities. From a hiring perspective, yeah, that then starts to get, a little bit stickier, which is that we are in the business of winning and we are in the business of making money, right? This is sports entertainment, win a championship, bring in lots of revenue, entertain lots of people. And so to some extent, there's this idea that, and I think this is true in any business. This isn't just sports entertainment. This is true in most, capitalist ventures of wanting to hire the best of the best of the best. And, let's think, it's a meritocracy. We're just going to hire the people who are the best. And I think that is a flawed way of thinking in today's society where, in fact, we're already doing really well. And, like when you're at the top, you're already very successful. And to think instead about what is the actual criteria that you're looking for. And it can be great. It doesn't have to be like, we'll hire somebody who's sort of good enough. It can be great. It can be like, we are going to hire people who are great. But that is sort of saying like, we want to look at the top 10%. Well, in that top 10%, you don't have to limit yourself to just the top 1%. You should be looking at what are you looking for? What do you care about? And interview anybody who fits that criteria. And not just limit yourself to like, well, this person was valedictorian at Harvard, so that's the person we're going to hire. And I think also it's this idea of people sometimes don't represent themselves as well. I think it's pretty well known that women are not as hyperbolic on their resumes, and men tend to be more hyperbolic about their skills. And, so sort of like find people whose resumes basically fit, the criteria that you're looking for, and they might not be the best of the best of the best, but still interview them. And you'll find out that, in fact, there's plenty of people out there who are super well qualified and are great and who really excel on a lot of the axes that aren't captured by a one-page resume. And it's to sort of expand your interview process and to expand who you're looking for and to be open. And it's not to say that, like, I don't know, sandbag yourself and have really intense affirmative action just for the sake of diversity. I mean, I think that's a bad idea as well. You're then setting people up to fail. But it's to be really honest with yourself about what is it that you're looking for in this role, and to it's really about like you have to constantly be aware of your hiring practices and to not get complacent. And I had another point and I lost my train of thought for a second there. Oh yeah. So the other thing is, right, if you're looking at this like really, really high performing level, I think that there can be a lot of pressure to high performing roles. So if you're thinking like, we're going to hire a new CEO, or we're going to hire a new CTO and all this other stuff, or there's going to be the GM, there's a lot more pressure to hire people who are like absolutely super the best qualified. And I haven't been in that position. But if you're hiring like an internship level or a fellow level or something that's sort of much more entry level, that's a great place to take swings, to hire people for their potential, for their upside. You see this in the draft all the time. This is in sports where you draft somebody, maybe in sort of one of the later rounds, who you're like, yeah, but okay, so they're sort of missing this one skill, but if they hit on that skill, oh my God, they're going to be unbelievable. And I think that you can do that in hiring as well, which is, it's also like, it's not like it's tenure. People you can find out that they're not a good fit in your organization, but you should be giving people chances. And so I think, especially in a lot of this sort of entry level positions and places where there's going to be a wide variety anyway in the skill sets that you might get. There's no way that in an entry-level position, you are going to get somebody who is a PhD statistician, a PhD software engineer, and has played, minor league ball. Like, it's just not going to happen. And so, like, it's okay to, allow for more diversity, and like, not just in background, but of like skill sets, of all of that other stuff. And again, I think a lot of it just comes from being really aware in what you're doing and expanding the pool, and not just cutting people off because the resume doesn't show a master's in statistics. That doesn't mean they're not skilled.
Have this prompter, always have a prompter. You have 15 minutes left. And so we take that pretty seriously because the organizers will cut us off. It's the proverbial, cane that comes across the stage and takes you off the stage. So, John, I would like for you to take a look at what's in the chat box, see what questions are there that can be answered directly with you as a start, and to the panelists to the point that they may have interest in the question and a response to it appropriate to their own experience. And then if we get through that and we comfortably still have a couple of minutes left, we can go back to the diversity question and then allow others, including Ben, if you would talk about our Sports Analytics Club program, which ultimately is a feeder 6 through 19, using middle and senior high school students to learn the fundamental skill set by using sports data-driven case studies. That is really where Ben and I started as the prompter, to increase the diversity by going younger, attracting by culture sports data-driven case studies, and then learning the skill sets to become marketable as interns and then as opportunities present themselves professionally. So, John, if you would look at the chat box and see what questions are up, and then if we have additional time, we can return back to the diversity strategic portion of this presentation. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep. So I'll hop in. I think the first one probably we can also sort of speak to, because it's come up a little bit, is a question about: have you faced challenges communicating results and recommendations to coaches, players, and people without a quantitative background? How have you overcome those challenges? I think it's a really salient question, because I think as we all alluded to, as I always say, you can have the best predictive model in the world, but if you can't convince people of what you're telling them, it just doesn't matter, right? You don't get any awards for building the best model. So it really comes down to how can you tell a story with data. And when I got asked, often I get asked by undergrads, what's a skill set that you sort of look for? And I always say, look, being technical is sort of necessary but not sufficient. We need people to have those skill sets. What's really harder to do is to actually communicate a very complicated concept in a very simple way. And so I always think about when I'm making a pitch to, I keep bringing up Sam Kennedy, our team president. Sam is not only a sales guy, but he never has more than 30 seconds, for anything. So, if I spend a month on a customer segmentation model and I need Sam's blessing, my output there is not a bunch of code. My output is a single slide or a single soundbite or kind of whatnot. So I think to answer the question, I would say two things. One is really making sure that your goal is not to prove how smart you are, but to sort of convince people of what you're trying to say. Don't come in, play on their playing field, right? Come in and meet them where they are, not sort of force them to come where you are. I think that's something that sometimes people with a very quantitative background can struggle with, because they're sort of used to knowing the answers, and to sort of quote unquote have to stream this down a little bit can be difficult. And I think the second thing is, when we came in on the business side, we had a ticketing team that, with 3 or 4 core people there had been at the Red Sox for a combined 95 years. You mentioned some game that said, oh yeah, back in '86, we had a game just like that, coming off a road trip. And, so we weren't going to come in and tell them, good news, everyone, your saviors are here. It's data to the rescue kind of thing. So we really came in and said, look, we're going to build out what we sort of think, but let's do a little bake-off, right? Here's what we think. Here's what sort of the baseline is. Let's use 2015 as an example of sort of seeing how it works. And also, let's look for small wins. Let's look for low-hanging fruit. Let's see if we can come in and say, look, so for us, we didn't do dynamic pricing on day one, but we have about 269 seats up on the Green Monster in Fenway Park, which are really cool seat, super premium, but also don't have many season ticket holders in them. So it's sort of a perfect little petri dish for sort of testing. We said, look, give us the green monster, let us do our thing up there and sort of show you the value of that. And so I think that's a useful way to sort of get people to accept a little bit things they're not comfortable with, because then you can sort of show results, a bit of a kind of a proof of concept or maybe like an MVP sort of model. So it's really helpful for us on the business side. And I'm sure these folks could speak to things in their lines as well. I'm sure maybe Catherine, you may have experience with players, because I remember back in my time on the baseball side, it's very different, for me to sort of try and teach, Mookie Betts or someone how to play right field is probably a different conversation than, teach our CMO how to use data to target our fan base. So.
And do you want to take a swing on the performance side? Since John has basically handed you the ball, so to speak, and Cat's like, how did I get the ball? I thought, John, you were supposed to be handling this.
Yeah,
I'm not in lead off for some reason.
I know. Well, I told you to lead off. You are the patriarch of this presentation.
I used to bat ninth, so yeah. I mean, in terms of the filtering stuff down to the player level, I mean, I do not talk to Bradley Beal about anything other than oh hey, for passing each other in the hallway. No, it's so there's this sort of high level research stuff that my team does, and then Dean Oliver, sort of one of the godfathers of basketball analytics, is an assistant coach with us. And so Dean and I will talk a lot about questions of interest and, from a basketball side of things, what really matters. And he understands the type of data that we capture. And then Dean might be the one to actually have that conversation with Brad. And I think that a lot of that is what ends up being really useful, is to have people with various levels of familiarity with data and the types of questions, which is right. I'm an expert in statistics. I'm not an expert in basketball. Our coach, Wes, expert in basketball, not an expert in statistics. But some of the other assistant coaches, have had more and more familiarity with data analytics. And as it permeates throughout sports, and as coaches become more used to the types of metrics that their analytics groups put out, those conversations become easier and easier. But, again, I'm definitely not sitting down with any players and having any level of conversation.
So I do want to add this point as a bookend, as I expressed to the audience, my very first experience with analytics and sports was basketball on paper in the spring of 2017. Dean Oliver was the author of that particular text. And so now he's gone from being the author of Basketball on Paper on the shelf in Ben Chill's office to now being an assistant coach for the Wizards. And to me, that's the evolution, ladies and gentlemen, from being a author of a complex textbook, essentially, to actually being on the bench from 2017 off the shelf of Ben Chill's library and onto the bench of Mr. Unseld in 2021 season. And that, to me, shows the evolution and appreciation of analytics driving decision-making from the bench to younger people who are not exposed to the evaluation of their performance. They never grew up around analytics as driving. It was driven by their athleticism and not driven by their ability to compute their athleticism in a programmable way that could diagram how they should then proceed forward to play. And so, John, if you can turn back to the chat box, we've got 5 minutes and counting down, but I will say this to the audience. Feel free to reach out to us. If you have questions that we don't get to, we can certainly give you an opportunity, young people, to be part of our Sports Analytics Club program. There's a lot of material. If you tap our link, that Ben and I would be happy to work with your universities as advisors, with your professional sports analysts, to your secondary teachers, to bring this concept of sports data-driven case studies to excite young people to become data scientists, to get advanced degrees in STEM, such as Catherine has, and also to pursue a career that they otherwise may have felt was out of reach because of just the platform that they were raised on. So, John, if there's a second question in the chat that we can sort of tackle and before they yank us off the stage, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. We'll make it quick. I saw one. So can you talk a bit about the potential of sports analytics to get people involved in math stats and data who have too often been closed out of those fields. And I like this one because I think it's a great question, but also we've all kind of touched on it in our own way, which is it is a bit of a gateway, right? I mean, I think, we all sort of had our own story about, whether it's Ben with, fantasy sports, doing it by hand, which I also did. It resonated with me. But, it's something where, look, was my first choice to be the numbers guy for the Red Sox? No, I wanted to play power forward for the Celtics. But once that wasn't the path anymore, and I realized I was good with numbers, I said, oh, well, hey, if I want to have sports be a part of my life and I still want to, be on the field after the World Series, well, this is probably my best kind of avenue. And so I can't tell you how many students I talk with, or high school students, or even sometimes parents of young kids that say, how do I use sports as sort of a way to get my kid excited about numbers and about data? And I think that's, again, for me, it was baseball cards growing up, but there's so many ways now. It's just so intertwined. It's such an opportunity for us with data science that, the underpinning of sports is all about numbers, right? And more every day, you watch some of these StatCast, visual, when you're watching baseball on television and they're showing you launch angles and, pitch, these things that, like, 10 years ago, you'd be like, what the heck? I'm talking about batting average. And now you're getting whether the ball was barreled and expected hit rate and things like that. So I do think it's a real great opportunity for folks that maybe wouldn't have thought of this as a field to sort of realize that they do have a passion that maybe they didn't get when they, we don't all have the great experience in math classes in middle school, high school, and kind of college. This is a way that I think people can, Catherine mentioned all of her projects. Whenever you have to pick a data set, it was sports, right? So having people realize that is sort of an avenue, I think is a great thing. And I probably talked right up to the edge there, Dean, but I'm happy to.
Well, now, and thank you all in the audience. Certainly, this last opportunity for a question to be answered is fundamental to why I'm here, to why the panelists are here, and that is we want to create an interest in this field for younger people to become enthusiastic about math, science, engineering, not in a Western civilization way of thinking, but let's up it by having you interested in sport, and then use sport to attract you to learning the skill set. And then once learning the skill set, then you can apply it to whatever industry sort of catches your passion. That is the fundamental goal of the Sports Analytics Club program, is to use grades 6 through 12 and sports data-driven projects to create interest so that you can be here at Datapalooza replacing us and becoming the legacy of this particular program. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today. And thank you for the panelists for accepting my invitation. And this is a continuing dialogue, and I hope that you will continue to dialogue with us about the opportunity to become the sports data scientists of the future. Thank you very much.